My family forgot my graduation on purpose, so I changed my name and never came back. And that decision changed everything. Brianna, where are you? The defense starts in 45 minutes. My stomach dropped as I stared at my phone. Mom, I'm at the auditorium, where I've told you I'd be for the past 8 months. There was a pause on the other end. The auditorium? Sweetheart, we thought that was next Friday. We're at Ethan's app launch right now. The whole family's here, we can't just leave. I stood there in my pressed charcoal suit, my thesis notes in hand, feeling like someone had punched me in the chest. Mom, I'm defending my dissertation today. I'm becoming Dr. Brianna Vance, today. And you're at a party for an app that doesn't even work. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. To understand why I didn't scream or beg in that hallway, you have to understand the specific architecture of my family. We lived in a sprawling brownstone in Boston, a place where affection was a currency and inflation was out of control. I wasn't the black sheep. That would imply they noticed me enough to dislike me. I was something else entirely. There is a concept in psychology called the glass child. It doesn't mean you're fragile. It means you are transparent. Your parents look right through you to focus on the siblings who are either shattering or shining too brightly. Because I was self-sufficient, because I never came home in a police car or failed a class, I became invisible. My stability was the window through which they watched my brother and sister self-destruct. My sister, Stephanie, was 33 and living a life curated for Instagram. She was an influencer, which in our house meant she was a professional crisis manager. Every week brought a new catastrophe, a breakup, a bad haircut, a shadow ban on social media that required my mother's full emotional bandwidth. Then there was Ethan. 26 years old, charming, and utterly useless. He was the visionary of the family. He dropped out of 2 colleges because the professors didn't get his vision, and since then, he had been burning through my parents' retirement fund with a series of failed startups. And then there was me. While Stephanie was filtering her selfies and Ethan was pivoting to crypto, I was in a lab, 12 hours a day, studying the neurobiology of Alzheimer's. I chose that field because I watched my grandmother fade away while my family argued over her jewelry. I wanted to save the mind before it emptied out. But in the Vance household, meritocracy was a myth. I remember a dinner about 6 months before my defense. It was one of the rare occasions I was summoned to the table. I had just secured a major grant, one that would fund a critical phase of my research. I waited for a lull in Stephanie's monologue about a sponsorship deal for teeth whitening strips. I got the grant, I said, my voice feeling too loud in the sudden silence. The university is funding my protocol. It's a huge step for early detection. My mother smiled, that tight, polite smile she used for waiters. That's nice, Brianna. You're always so busy with your schoolwork. Schoolwork. I was 29, developing medical treatments, and she talked about it like I was handing in a 3rd-grade diorama. Before I could correct her, Ethan slammed his hand on the table. That's awesome, Bri, but listen to this. I finally cracked the code for the launch. The app is called Vibe. It doesn't do anything specific, it just connects people based on their, energy. It's going to be the next TikTok. My father, who had barely looked up during my announcement, suddenly leaned in. That sounds scalable, son. What do you need to get it off the ground? Just a bridge round, Ethan said, reaching for the wine. 75,000, for the launch party. We need influencers, we need buzz, it has to be exclusive. I watched my father pull out his checkbook. He didn't ask for a business plan. He didn't ask for a return on investment. He just wrote the check. $75,000. I sat there, gripping my fork until my knuckles turned white. I had spent 6 months writing proposals, citing sources, and defending my thesis to a board of skeptics to get $50,000 for medical research. Ethan got $75,000 over roasted chicken because he had a vague idea and a charming smile. That was the moment the glass started to crack. I realized that my competence was my curse. They didn't worry about me, so they didn't care about me. They assumed I would always be there, steady and reliable, part of the furniture. They didn't know that even furniture can be moved. I didn't just mention the date, I documented it. I treated the logistics of my defense like a lab experiment, where every variable had to be controlled, verified, and peer-reviewed. If there is one thing a scientist knows, it is that data doesn't lie, people lie, memories lie, but the receipts, they are absolute. October 12th. I sent the official university invitation on heavy cardstock, embossed with the department seal. I watched my mother open it at the kitchen counter. She said it was very fancy, and put it under a stack of Pottery Barn catalogs. November 24th. Thanksgiving. I stood up before the turkey was carved and announced the time and location. 3 p.m. The main auditorium. Ethan asked if there would be food. I said yes. He put it in his phone. I watched him do it. January, February, March. By my count, I verbally confirmed the date 23 times. I sent calendar invites. I sent reminder texts. I sent a map of the campus, with the parking garage circled in red. But while I was mapping neural pathways to save the human mind from decay, my family was mapping the seating chart for the Vibe launch party. The contrast was so sharp it felt like a scalpel. My research was about preserving identity, about keeping people from losing themselves to a disease that steals everything. Ethan's app was about curating a mood. It was a button you pressed that played a sound effect based on the weather. And for that button, my parents had rented the rooftop of the most expensive hotel in the city. They hired a DJ from Ibiza. They catered sushi flown in from Japan. $75,000 for a mood. 3 days before the defense, we were having dinner. The air in the dining room was thick with the scent of roasted garlic and Ethan's nervous energy. He was vibrating, talking a mile a minute about user acquisition and viral coefficients. I waited for him to take a breath. Just a final check, I said, keeping my voice level. Saturday. 3 p.m. The auditorium. You have the parking pass, I emailed, right? My mother didn't even look up from her salad. She stabbed a cherry tomato with a violence that seemed unnecessary. Brianna, honestly, you are being so neurotic. We know, it's Saturday. Stop pestering us, you're acting like we're senile. I just want to make sure, I said. It's the culmination of 5 years of work. And Ethan's launch is the start of his career, my father interjected, pouring himself another glass of wine. He needs the support right now. He's under a lot of pressure. You've always been good at school. This is just more school. There it was. The data point I had been missing. It wasn't that they didn't know the time. It wasn't that they were confused. It was a value judgment. My achievement was just school. It was expected, therefore, it was worthless. Ethan's achievement was a gamble, therefore, it was precious. I looked at them, my mother picking at her greens, my father swirling his wine, my brother checking his follower count, and I realized I wasn't sitting at a dinner table. I was sitting in a courtroom, and the verdict had already been read. They knew exactly where they were supposed to be on Saturday. And they had already decided they weren't going to be there. I hung up the phone. I didn't throw it. I didn't scream. I simply placed it in my pocket, smoothed the lapel of my suit, and walked into the auditorium. The room was cool and smelled of floor wax and old paper. The committee sat behind a long table, their faces illuminated by the glow of my title slide. In the front row, there were 5 empty seats. I had placed reserved signs on them that morning. I walked down the steps, picked up the signs, and dropped them into the trash can by the podium. The sound they made hitting the metal bottom was the only applause I needed. I didn't defend my thesis to a family that loved me. I defended it to a panel of strangers who respected me. For 2 hours, I was clinical. I dissected the data. I fielded questions about neural degeneration and protein folding. I didn't stumble. I didn't look for approval in the empty chairs. When the department head shook my hand and called me doctor, it wasn't a title given by blood, it was a title earned by grit. I walked out of that building into the gray Boston afternoon, and I felt lighter. I realized then that I wasn't experiencing a tragedy. I was undergoing a necessary medical procedure. There is a concept in trauma recovery and in surgery called the peace of the severed limb. When a part of the body becomes gangrenous, it begins to poison the blood. The tissue dies, but it stays attached, leaching toxins into the healthy system. The patient gets sicker and sicker, trying to save what is already dead. My family was gangrene. They weren't just absent, they were necrotic. They were actively killing the person I was trying to become. And you don't negotiate with gangrene, you don't ask it to be better. You amputate. It is a violent act to cut off your own history, but it is the only way to survive the infection. I went back to my apartment and opened my laptop. The job offer from the biotech firm in San Diego had been sitting in my inbox for a week. I had hesitated because I thought San Diego was too far, too sunny, too different from the life I was supposed to lead. Now, those were the exact reasons I wanted it. I typed my acceptance, then I opened a new tab for the Massachusetts court system, name change petition. I didn't want to be Brianna, the glass child. I didn't want to carry the last name of people who valued an app launch over a medical breakthrough. I filled out the forms. Proposed new name, Brianna Vance. Vance meant marshland, something thriving, something that filters out the toxins and supports life on its own terms. The logistics of my erasure were precise. I broke my lease. I sold my furniture. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I treated my departure like a witness protection relocation. 2 weeks later, as I sat in the airport terminal waiting for my one-way flight to California, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Hope the school thing went well. Ethan's party was insane. We're all so tired. Let's do brunch Sunday? She didn't ask if I passed. She didn't ask why I hadn't called. She just assumed I was still there, waiting on the shelf where they kept me. I looked at the message. I didn't feel anger. I felt the cool, sterile detachments of a surgeon finishing a shift. I didn't reply. I went to my settings, scrolled down to the contact list, and selected block caller. Then I did the same for my father. For Ethan. For Stephanie. I didn't block them to punish them. I blocked them to cauterize the wound. I boarded the plane as Dr. Brianna Vance. When the wheels lifted off the tarmac, I didn't look back at the city. I looked forward. Toward the sun. 3 years is a lifetime in the biotech industry. In San Diego, time didn't move in seasons of gray and slush. It moved in funding rounds and FDA approvals. I was no longer the girl in the charcoal suit standing in a hallway. I was Dr. Brianna Vance, the lead researcher at a company valued at $400 million. I had an office with a view of the Pacific Ocean. I had a team of brilliant scientists who listened when I spoke. I had a portfolio of patents that were revolutionizing how we treated neurodegenerative diseases. I had everything I wanted, except for one bad habit. I still watched them. I had a burner social media account. I didn't follow them, I just checked in, once a month, like a scientist checking a control group to ensure the variables hadn't changed. It was a grim fascination. Ethan's app, Vibe, had crashed and burned within 6 months. The $75,000 launch party yielded exactly 0 active users after the first month. My parents had quietly refinanced the brownstone to cover his debts. Stephanie's influencer career had plateaued, and she was now shilling diet teas that were mostly laxatives. They were drowning, slowly and publicly. Then, on a Tuesday morning in November, I got a Google alert for my brother's name. Ethan Brennan announces launch of Neuralink, the future of memory care. I froze. My coffee cup hovered halfway to my mouth. Ethan couldn't spell neuroscience, let alone revolutionize it. I clicked the link. It was a Kickstarter video. There was Ethan, wearing a black turtleneck, standing in front of a whiteboard. He looked older, desperate. But he still had that salesman shine. "We have discovered a way to map cognitive decline before it happens," he said to the camera. "Using a proprietary protein folding algorithm, Neuralink can predict Alzheimer's 10 years in advance." I stopped the video. I rewound it. I played it again. He pointed to a diagram on the whiteboard. It was a complex chemical structure involving beta amyloid clusters. It was my diagram. I didn't just recognize the science, I recognized the handwriting. That wasn't a digital graphic. It was a scan of a page from a spiral-bound notebook. My notebook. When I fled Boston, I left behind boxes of my undergraduate and early doctoral research. I left them in the attic, assuming they were trash to my family. Just schoolwork. Ethan hadn't just pivoted. He had raided my room. He had dug through the boxes of the sister he ignored, found the research he once mocked, and decided to sell it as his own. The betrayal hit me differently than the graduation. That was neglect. This was looting. They had treated me like a ghost, and now they were robbing the grave. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and watched the rest of the video. He was asking for $2 million in seed funding. He claimed to have the foundational research completed. He had no idea what he was doing. He thought he was stealing ideas. He didn't realize he was walking into a minefield. When I arrived in San Diego, the first thing I did before I even unpacked my clothes was file for patents. I patented the protocol. I patented the algorithm. I patented the specific chemical structure he was pointing to on that whiteboard. I owned it all. Ethan was building a company on a foundation of stolen property, and he had built it directly on top of a trap I had set 3 years ago. I picked up my office phone and dialed the legal department. "Get the general counsel," I said. "And tell him to clear his schedule. We're going hunting." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. My general counsel, Marcus, sent a query letter to Neuralink's public email. It was vague, professional, and devastatingly tempting. We expressed interest in a strategic partnership and potential acquisition of their proprietary technology. We didn't use my name. We used the holding company's name, Vance Ventures. They bit. Of course they bit. They were drowning in debt, bleeding cash on a fake product, and desperate for a lifeline. Within 4 hours, Ethan replied. He was eager. He was sloppy. He agreed to a meeting in San Diego 2 days later. I watched the security feed from my office as their rental car pulled up to the building. My parents, Stephanie, and Ethan stepped out. They looked older. The stress of maintaining a lifestyle they couldn't afford had etched deep lines into their faces. But they still had that air of unearned confidence. The swagger of people who believe the world exists to serve them. They walked into the lobby, staring up at the glass atrium, likely calculating how much of this wealth they could siphon off. I sat at the head of the conference table in the main boardroom. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, framing the Pacific Ocean like a mural. I turned my chair away from the door, facing the water. I wanted them to see the view before they saw me. I wanted them to understand the scale of what I had built without them. The door opened. "Dr. Vance is ready for you," the receptionist said, then closed the door. I heard the heavy footsteps on the plush carpet. I heard my father clear his throat, preparing his pitch. "Dr. Vance," Ethan started, his voice slick with charm. "It is an honor. We're huge admirers of your investment portfolio. We think Neuralink is the perfect fit for—" I spun the chair around. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the room. Ethan's mouth hung open mid-sentence. My mother dropped her designer purse. Stephanie froze, her hand halfway to her hair. I didn't smile. I didn't stand up. I simply interlaced my fingers on the mahogany table and waited. "Brianna?" my mother whispered, the words strangling in her throat. Then, the pivot. I watched it happen in real time. The shock morphed into a desperate, cloying warmth. "Oh my God, Brianna!" She took a step forward, arms reaching out. "We've been looking everywhere for you. We were so worried. Look at you, look at this place." "Sit down," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it stopped her cold. It wasn't the voice of the daughter who begged them to come to a dissertation. It was the voice of a CEO who could buy and sell their entire existence. They sat. They looked small in the ergonomic leather chairs. Ethan tried to recover. He laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "Okay. Wow. This is wild. You're Dr. Vance? You changed your name? That's why we couldn't find you. Bree, this is actually perfect. We're family. We can keep this in-house. Imagine what we can do together." "We aren't going to do anything together," I said. "And we aren't family. We are opposing parties in a federal lawsuit." I slid a black folder across the table. It slid effortlessly across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Ethan. "Open it," I commanded. Ethan opened the folder. His eyes scanned the top document. His face went gray. "These are cease and desist orders," I explained, my tone clinical. "Followed by a lawsuit for intellectual property theft, corporate espionage, and patent infringement. But these are my ideas, Ethan stammered, looking at my father for backup. I found them in the attic. You found notebooks, I corrected. You found raw data. What you didn't check, because you never checked the details, Ethan, is that I filed patents for that specific protein folding sequence 3 weeks after I moved to California. United States patent number 8904321. I own the math, I own the chemistry, I own the structure. My father finally spoke. Brianna, be reasonable. You can't sue your brother. We're in a tight spot. We just need a break. We can split the profits. There are no profits, I said. There is only liability. You built a company on stolen land, and I am the landlord. I stood up then, towering over them. You didn't come to my defense because it was boring. You didn't care about my work until you thought you could sell it. You ignored the scientist, but you can't ignore the patent holder. I pressed the intercom button on the table. Security. Please escort the defendants out of the building. The lawsuit wasn't a battle, it was an autopsy. My legal team dissected Neuralink with the precision of a coroner. We didn't just sue for patent infringement, we sued for corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and damages that numbered in the millions. Ethan tried to settle. He sent emails begging for a family resolution. He left voicemails crying about how I was ruining his life. I didn't listen to them. I forwarded them to Marcus, my general counsel, who added them to the evidence pile labeled admission of guilt. The collapse of their world was financial, but it was also existential. Without my patents, Ethan's company was worthless. The investors he had lined up, people who trusted the Vance name, pulled out within 48 hours. He was left with a lease he couldn't pay, employees he couldn't pay, and a legal bill that would take 3 lifetimes to settle. My parents tried to save him. They always did. They liquidated their retirement accounts. They sold the brownstone in Boston, the house where I had been invisible for 29 years. There was a dark, poetic symmetry to it. They sold the home where they ignored me to pay for the crime of the son they idolized. They lost the physical structure of our family because they had neglected the structural integrity of the people inside it. I didn't watch the foreclosure auction. I didn't look up the sale price on Zillow. I simply deleted the bookmark on my browser. 6 months later, I was sitting on my deck in San Diego. The sun was setting, turning the ocean a deep, bruised purple. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. I thought about the family portrait that used to hang in our hallway in Boston. We were all wearing matching sweaters. Ethan and Stephanie were smiling, bright and center. I was in the back, slightly out of focus, blending into the wallpaper. For years, I thought I was the ghost in that picture. I thought I was the one who wasn't real. But, sitting there, watching the waves crash against the shore, I realized I had it backward. They were the ghosts. They were specters of a life built on appearances and borrowed money. They were echoes of a status they hadn't earned. I was the only thing in that picture that was solid. I was the only one who had built something that could stand up to the wind. I took a sip of my wine. The silence in my house wasn't lonely. It was heavy, rich, and mine. The severed limb had healed. There was a scar, sure. There always is. But the infection was gone. The fever had broken. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I saw myself. And the view was magnificent. If you've ever had to cut off a part of your life to save the rest of it, hit that like button. And share this story with someone who needs to know that their worth isn't defined by the people who can't see it.